It is true we are in PC times where you don't yell, you don't fight, and yes, this possibly is the more evolved place, but you have to experience the other to get there, and that you can't just skip that step and go straight to, well, I don't fight, I don't argue.
I know this because Tyler knows this.
2.5. Think of everything we've accomplished.
I had gone on a vacation, I'd been hiking and camping, and I had gotten into a really big fight with some people over noise at night in the woods. You know, some people who just had to camp right next to our camp. Just had to bring some huge radio up to 3,000 feet on the Pacific Crest Trail and have some big blowout party in the middle of the night. And I came back to work at the end of my vacation with my face just bashed. My face was so awful and so trashed that nobody would acknowledge it. Because to acknowledge it, somehow they would have to find out something about my private life they just did not want to know. And so for 3 months, as my face slowly changed color, eventually coming back to white, people would look at my chest and they would talk to my Adam's apple and they would say, "So, how was your weekend? Did you do anything interesting?" And I'd be looking at them with 2 huge black eyes saying, "No. How about you?" If you looked bad enough, no one would dare ask you what you did with your free time.
Soap.
Sorry?
I make and I sell soap.
Well, this is what where the book springboards from, saying that we are all spectators. We don't participate anymore. We sit behind our TV screens and our leather sofas and don't get in there. And the expression of the book that I was really drawn to was not about getting out in aggression, was not about pounding the other guy. Mm-hmm. It was more about just getting in the machine and receiving.
I've always thought that on a certain level, the movie is metaphoric. It's a study on a person going a little bit insane to going insane to save himself.
We were talking about how just earlier how anytime you question established idea, and you try to take that in a different direction, you're always going to overcompensate until you find that middle ground, and that's kind of.
And I think it's a story about how a character, in a desperate effort to sort of make himself start to feel something through a part of himself, goes way too far and then has to pull himself back. You know, and I think it's important to draw a distinction between what the film says and what one of the characters says, because a character is advocating something that the film doesn't necessarily go all the way.
I say never be complete. I say stop being perfect. I say let's evolve. Let the chips fall where they may. That's me, and I could be wrong. Maybe it's a terrible tragedy.
I just feel like a character has to say something. Even if it's stupid something, a character has to stand for something and has to risk saying the wrong thing. Even if it's just so somebody else can step forward and say, "Oh, that's full of shit." At least they're saying something. You know, taking responsibility for their viewpoint, which is really what Tyler's speeches were about. Expressing himself even more so than sort of coming up with a vision or a dream.
Tyler, on sort of a philosophic, political level, he definitely represents, I think, a very Nietzschean impulse toward the idea of nihilism as a practical approach. It's a lot like sort of Nietzsche's Zarathustra. It's the idea that nothing can change in a positive way unless a lot of the old values are ripped down. What gets explored in this film is the idea that nihilism is a very sexy idea when you're young and feel frustrated, but that becoming mature means recognizing the practical limits and in some ways the hypocrisies that nihilism lends itself to. You know, if all stories are the same in the end, or if there's really only a few core stories, I think this is kind of just like The Graduate. It's a story of youthful dislocation and of the feeling of sort of entering the adult world and feeling out of sync with the value system that you're expected to engage in, and trying to figure out the answer to the question of how to be happy. After fighting, everything else in your life got the volume turned down.
In a way, it's like a huge Greek archetype in that your fatal flaw is what destroys you. The one thing you can't control, no matter how hard you work in the rest of your life, that's the part that's going to kill you.
There are so few social model novels or stories for men. For women, there are, every season. There's a new Joy Luck Club, a new How to Make an American Quilt. Just all these different models in which women can come together and talk about their lives. And if you're a man, you've got either Fight Club or you have the Dead Poet Society. And that is really it. So we don't have a lot of narratives that depict to men a role or a kind of script in which to come together and talk about their shed. Another thing is Jordan Peterson. He talks about that need for really rough play. We've kind of fallen away from this idea of consensual rough play, and I think Fight Club resonated with that a lot. And also the idea of Joseph Campbell's idea that there needs to be a secondary father in men's lives, that you're born, if you're lucky, with a biological father that you do not choose, and that is the nurturing, loving father that you eventually kind of have to reject. But in doing so, you have to choose a new father, and that father by choice typically is a minister or a teacher or a drill sergeant or a coach, and you kind of put yourself in apprenticeship and agree to learn what they're going to teach you. And that is getting harder and harder and harder to find. So Fight Club was also depicting a new form of the secondary father with all these kids that were showing up on the doorstep of this ramshackle old house.
Hey, even the Mona Lisa's falling apart.
I thought Fight Club was deeply fascist in a very interesting way. But I'm saying that in some way dismissively, although I actually liked the movie. I also think it was fascist because it was a celebration in some sense of force. It was fascist sort of in the same way that the Iron Man character is fascist, but I also thought it was a really interesting exploration of the idea of developing the shadow. And I do believe that if men don't become consciously dangerous, they become unconsciously dangerous. And so it's much better to become consciously dangerous. And it's something that every man should really aim at.
Tell him you blew it all up. That's what he wants to hear.
So there were just so many aspects of men's lives that were not being addressed when Fight Club came out. And it sort of reinvented so many of those things that had fallen by the wayside.
It's the greatest moment of your life, man. And you're off somewhere miserable. I am not.
I remember when we first aired it at the Venice Film Festival. We sat next to the guy who was head of the festival. I don't know exactly what his title is. And the movie starts out and it's dead silent. And I don't know if this is about translation or they're really just not into the film. And I see the festival head. I see him start to go, with bits that I think are really funny. And Edward and I are laughing out loud. We're like the obnoxious Americans laughing at our own movie. And there's a particularly offensive joke from the Marla character. And at that point, he just got up and left.
I didn't know who the makeup of this audience was going to be. I thought it was, these were going to be rabid cinephiles. And I think the median age of the audience was 73.
It was dead silent. And we proceeded to howl even harder. And we had a great experience. We thought we were onto something.
And I was sitting there and these women came out and there was 4 or 5 of them. It was, enough of a portion of a row. And they all kind of vaguely looked like Anne Bancroft in The Graduate. And they were all in their 60s. And this woman looked up and she saw me there and she recognized you have to just stand up and wave at the beginning of the screening. And she looked at me and she just went. And I remember, it always reminds me of Rocky Horror Picture Show, where Tim Curry said, where Susan Sarandon says his muscles are too big. And he says, we didn't make it for you.
Hey, thank you so much for stopping by and watching this YouTube video. I'm really enjoying this new character study video where we break down iconic characters from movie and television. If you have suggestions for future ideas, make sure to drop those in the comments below. You also see a link down there to Writer Field Notes, which is a blog that I'm currently working on. You'll get emails and that kind of thing. If you sign up, you'll get emails about new videos, new podcasts where I talk to screenwriters and directors, and also some information on my new book. Now, if you're just here for character study, just to have fun, that's awesome. But if you really want to know more about writing, or especially screenwriting, I've interviewed about 200 or more screenwriters, and I packed all their information in this book. It comes out February 13th, 2021. Sign up for the newsletter below to get more details on that, but it's all at writerfieldnotes.com. Thanks again for signing up. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks again.